political science and sociology up in Fort McMurray at Keano College. So this is actually a really great session to be helping to facilitate, because I try to weave a lot of these issues into my classes, and Eriel has even Skyped into my classroom before, so it's great to be here. Sorry. So I'm going to start off by introducing Eriel, and then Eriel will speak, and then I'll introduce Crystal, and Crystal will speak after that. So it's a great pleasure to introduce Eriel Deranger, my friend and fellow activist. So Eriel is a Dene Indigenous activist and member of the Athabasca Chipewyan First Nation of Northern Alberta. She is currently employed as a tar sands campaigner and communications coordinator for ACFN. Her work focuses on greater awareness about the impacts of the Alberta Tar Sands and demanding that all levels of government and the private sector fully implement the unique Indigenous rights her people hold as described by Treaty 8 and the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. She is also a wife and a mother of 2 beautiful children. She comes from a family that has long battled industrial and sometimes illegal activities on their traditional and treaty lands. And on various occasions, I've heard some of these stories and have been really impressed by her family and her own efforts to fight for her people. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Eriel. Thank you.
My presentation's over here, so I have to keep...
Don't worry, I'll move.
He's going to move right away. Thank you, Laura, for introducing me, and I want to thank everyone for coming out today, and I want to acknowledge the traditional territory of the Papas Chase and the Enoch First Nations territory, which we're on here today, and thank Parkland Institute for inviting me to come and speak today. So the topic I was given was, I like the title. Sorry, I'm just going to look at it again. It was a really interesting title about how it was about the corporate onslaught facing First Nations. And I actually really enjoyed given that subject matter, because a lot of the industrial development that's happening on our lands is at the hands of corporations, which are manipulating our governments, which are manipulating the rights of Indigenous people to infringe on our rights. And I want to start by talking about the ACFN and giving you an idea who the ACFN are, and then trying to bring it into a broader perspective that this isn't just about individuals, this isn't just about Alberta, this isn't just about simply one project, which is, in my case, the oil sands. So, starting off with, who are the ACFN? The ACFN, or the Athabasca Chipewyan First Nation, are Dene Sutlene people. Our people predominantly live in Northern Alberta, and the members of ACFN predominantly live in the community of Fort Chipewyan, Fort Smith, Fort McMurray, and Edmonton. We have about 1,100 members, and we're one of the only First Nations in Canada that almost wholly lives off reserve. And the reason why is our community was moved off of our reserve lands in the 1960s because of hydro development projects which flooded our reserve lands, and we were moved into the hamlet of Fort Chipewyan, where we currently do not have reserve land status, where we pay taxes and all the same things into the municipality like everyone else. One of the other interesting things about our nation is that we are the only First Nation in Canada that has not signed a contribution funding agreement, meaning we receive 0 funds from the federal government like other First Nations do in the country. So we are completely independent. I like to refer to us as a rogue nation, because without having any financial ties to the government, we are pretty much independent and can make our own rules. So we do a little bit. We are signatories to Treaty 8, and Treaty 8 was signed in 1899 on the south shores of Lake Athabasca in the community of Fort Chipewyan. And Treaty 8 is one of the largest numbered treaties in Canada. It is right there, right under Treaty 11. I don't know if you guys can see that. But Treaty 8 was one of the largest treaties in Canada, largest areas-wise. And the treaty was signed by our leaders to safeguard our rights, to safeguard the future and longevity of our culture, our identity, and our people. In one of the previous slides, one of the things I had stated, whoops, wrong way, was one of the quotes here was, "The land is the essence of the Athabasca Chipewyan First Nations culture, values, and spirituality." Now, when these treaties were signed, that's what they were signed to protect. our cultures, our values, and our spirituality. And in those treaties, some of the most important clauses was the protection of our abilities to hunt, fish, trap, and access our cultural and traditional territories. And the reason why that's so important is our identities are so intrinsically linked to the land. We are the land. Dene Sutlene, Kai Tal Dene Sutlene means the people of the willow. And the willow in this particular instance is the Athabasca, which is predominantly marshlands. It's one of the last freshwater inland deltas of the world. It has some unique geological features like fens, which are marshlands, bogs, and muskegs. And our people identify with those lands. They are places of being. And one of the things that I really like to talk about is the fact that we all have places of being. You know, our ancestors, or your ancestors, might be Irish, or Scottish, or English, or African, or Somalian, or Sri Lankan, and those are places. You have places of being that you identify with. And for the Athabasca Chipewyan First Nation, our identity and our place of being is the Athabasca Delta. If the Athabasca Delta is destroyed, we become effectively lost. We are lost people. We are places without places of being, identities, and our places are destroyed, and with it, our identities, our culture, our spirituality, and our values are taken with it. Interestingly enough, the Canadian Constitution was amended in 1982 to protect and safeguard those very rights that our ancestors signed. Those are treaty rights to hunt, fish, trap, and access our lands, and to be consulted and accommodated were enshrined in the Canadian Constitution in 1982 and into the Charter of Rights and Freedom. That means that our rights are paramount and they cannot be absolved or destroyed, and that they are above other laws. And the only way to get rid of them really would be to really take that amendment out of the Canadian Constitution, which I don't think anyone's willing to do that at this point. Now, just to give you a description and idea of where our people predominantly reside, it's in the community of Fort Chipewyan, which is downstream from one of the largest industrial developments on this planet, which is Alberta's Tar Sands. We are in a fly-in, fly-out community. It has a winter road that's open. I don't think it's open yet. It gets later and later every single year, and it closes earlier and earlier every single year. But that's the only road. It's a winter road. When all the lakes and rivers and muskegs freeze over, we can drive there. But in the summer months, spring, summer, and fall months, the only way in and out is by plane or by boat. And you can see down at the bottom, if you can see it, that the Athabasca River runs northward to the community of Fort Chipewyan. And from outer space, you can see the tailings ponds, which the name pond is obviously a very poor description because these things are so massive. They're more like lakes, and they're covering an area close to about 180 square kilometers at this point, and contain massive amounts of toxic contaminants. So the Acfn, our traditional territory, spans in this region. It's, again, one of the last remaining freshwater deltas in the world. It is also, a large portion of our territory is actually a World Heritage UNESCO site that's currently being threatened by this development, and it's being threatened because of this. Does anyone know what this is? This is tar sand, bitumen, tar sands, oil sands. It has various different names depending on who you're talking to. Bitumen being the scientific name. It is heavy oil mixed with clay and minerals, and it is not your traditional sweet crude oil. In order to extract this oil, it involves an immense amount of energy, an immense amount of water, and an immense amount of manpower, and an immense amount of capital. And our traditional territory is currently under threat, and not just my traditional territory, but the traditional territories of many of the nations within Treaty 8 and Treaty 6. And this area in Northern Alberta, all the way down from just north of Edmonton, upwards to near Fort Chipewyan, from east to west, is being threatened by tar sands development. To give you an idea of just how big the footprint and the fingerprint of these projects really are, this is the lease sites from 2004. It's much bigger now. In the middle there, if you can see it, there's Fort McMurray. What we have here is every multinational corporation, almost every multinational corporation in the world has some sort of vested interest in the tar sands. Now, the names have changed and the places have changed because we get a lot of swapping of leases and swapping of sites by companies and selling to other ones and mergers and conglomerations. But what we're seeing is that every multinational corporation in the world has a vested interest in coming to this territory to reap the profits from these projects. And what they're leaving in their wake is nothing but destruction. Dr. Schindler put it very well. There is nothing on this planet that compares with the destruction going on there. If there were a global prize for unsustainable development, the tar sands would be a clear winner. And the reason why is that the industry is all but destroying the landscapes, the places of being and the identities of the indigenous peoples that lived there from time immemorial, pre-colonization, for thousands and thousands of years. The industry destroys our natural environment, and they remove what they like to refer to as overburden, or the boreal forests. I mean, you could call it one or the other, I guess. And since operations have begun, more than 1.4 billion tons of pristine forests, of our ecosystems, of our natural world is being removed. This is more dirt than has been moved, than was moved for the Great Wall of China, the Suez Canal, the Great Pyramids of Cheops, and the 10 largest dams in the world combined. In addition to destroying our natural landscape by the removal of it, they are also leaving in its wake toxic contaminant, toxic lakes, tailings ponds. And these tailings ponds are not even just a toxic legacy. In order to create these toxic legacies, they're taking our clean, pristine drinking water from the Athabasca Delta and the Athabasca watershed to produce this oil. In order to produce 1 barrel of tar sands oil, oil sands, or raw bitumen, dilbit, they have to use between up to 4 barrels of water, depending on the technology. What ends up doing is about 90% of that water is unusable. It goes into these toxic tailings ponds, and they can recycle some of the water in the tailings ponds, but 90%, more than 90%, I think it's 95% of the water is not usable. It ends up in these toxic tailing lakes, and right now the licenses for these companies exceeds the licenses for the city of Calgary. So we're talking about allowing these companies the license to annually take water withdrawals from this very fragile watershed system for up to 3 million people per day. Right now, that means the licenses actually exceed what the water levels for the longevity of the Athabasca Delta could sustain. Remember, this is the lifeline for the Athabasca Chipewyan First Nation, for the Mikisew Cree, for the First Nations that live downstream from these river systems. This is our roadway. These are our fishing grounds. This is our drinking water. This is the very essence of our identity, our cultures, and our values. And in addition to withdrawing and to leaving these toxic legacies in these giant ponds where we saw thousands of ducks die and even more again recently this year, we were also seeing that these toxic ponds or lakes are leaching. An average of every day over 11 million liters of toxic contaminant leach into the Athabasca watershed and the Mackenzie River Basin every single day. Now, what is that doing to the rights of the people of the Athabasca Chipewyan First Nation? This is leading to the destruction and contamination of critical habitat for species, for migratory birds, waterfowl, game like moose and caribou and bison. What we're seeing is that their habitats are being destroyed. And if they're not all but being destroyed, the areas that are left are being contaminated. We're talking about Canada not just stop trampling on the rights of First Nations. We're trampling on legislation and laws that were built to protect environments and ecosystems and species at risk, like the Alberta caribou or the Alberta wood bison. These are both species at risk and threatened. I believe that there are over 54 at-risk or threatened species within the Athabasca Delta region, which are currently at risk because, or currently being more threatened every single year from this development. What that has to do with First Nations. When we talk about the destruction and the contamination of the areas where our species that we survive and we thrive on, you go down the food chain. Our water is being contaminated. And if we get water filtration services, which we do have, it doesn't matter because the moose and the caribou and the bison and the waterfowl, they don't have water filtration services, and they're drinking the water. And our people are subsistence people. Many of our people still hunt, fish, and trap, and they subsidize the cost of living and their grocery bills by continuing to hunt, fish, and trap. And what does that do? It puts us at risk. It puts our people at risk, and what we're seeing is disproportionate rates of cancers, autoimmune diseases in the community of Fort Chipewyan. Leukemias and lymphomas are threefold higher. Rare cases of bile duct cancer have been seen in the community, ones that you should only see in about 100,000 people. 1 in 100,000 people, there have been 6 recorded cases in the last 10 years in a community of 1,200. We're seeing other soft tissue cancers, breast cancer, and other types of cancers in the community. And so what we're seeing is that if you go back through what are the factors, the Alberta government and the Canadian government have done 0 studies to trace back the factors that are contributing to an increase in rare forms of cancer and an increase in these types of cancers in the community, and they simply put it on the First Nations, saying that it is first Aboriginal people have a tendency to live high-risk lifestyles. So, our natural world, our places of being, our identities, this is what it is. Industry likes to claim, don't worry, we'll put it all back the way it was. We can reclaim these lands, it'll all be good. This is a picture of a reclamation site. To date, it's actually not less than 1% now. They've managed to go over the 1%. It's less than 2% now, so I need to correct this slide. But to date, less than 2% of the tar sands operations have been certified as reclaimed. To date, they have, I can't remember let me see if I have the numbers of the amount of land. No, I don't have it in here. I don't know, I can't remember what it is right now that's been developed, but they've been in operation since the 60s. This isn't some new thing. So since 1960, I believe it was 1963, was one of the first major operators, which was Syncrude. They've been operating for over 50 years, and in 50 years, they've managed to certify less than 2% of reclamation. And the reclamation sites, just to give you a reminder, before, after. For our people, we will be losing 50 to 100 years of loss of use in these lands. 50 to 100 years before it'll go back to what it was before. That means generations, multiple generations will have lost our access to hunt, fish, and trap, and access our cultural lands and identity as promised to us through our treaties, as entrenched and enshrined in the Canadian Constitution and protected by the Charter of Rights and Freedoms in this country. This is one project. This is one part of a giant project. And when you look at the scope of what they want to do with these projects, the big purple dot in the middle, that's where the tar sands exists right now. But the tar sands isn't simply here in Alberta. It's the largest giga project in the world. It involves the development, it will involve the development, if they have their way. It will involve the development of multiple pipelines feeding natural gas to power the machineries and the refining of this crude oil, pipelines to ship it down to other parts of North America and abroad, and it's going to involve refining and shipping this stuff all over the place, and along the way, trampling on the rights of those that are most impacted, communities of color, First Nations people. This is a pure example of environmental racism. But No, not but yet. I'll get into that after. So Canada is actually only the testing grounds. You pull out even a little bit further, and what do you find? The tar sands don't just exist here in Canada. They exist in other parts of the United States, in Venezuela, in the Congo, in Israel, and other parts of the world. Analysts are predicting that they're going to be investing hundreds of billions of dollars into this, into the infrastructure to build this. Sorry, my computer decided it didn't like me anymore. There we go. And these are old maps, because in actuality, we're winning the fight. The Northern Gateway Pipeline, the Keystone XL have been delayed and delayed and delayed and delayed, so much to the point that, yes. So much so that they've actually proposed a brand new pipeline. It's called the Energy East Pipeline. And because they amended environmental legislation, they are pushing that pipeline through as fast and as furious as possible. Speaking of how they were able to make amendments, let's talk about this. First Nations rights have become the last remaining stronghold for environmental protection in Canada because of the omnibus bills 45 and 38, which we saw the steamrolling of environmental legislation and the streamlining of environmental legislation and laws in this country. They basically ripped everything apart, but the one thing that they couldn't rip apart were treaty rights in this country. First Nations in Canada are standing up, and they're standing up strong. Our nation has already done a few things. We've filed suit against Shell Canada for failure to meet past agreements. We have filed an appeal against the decision to approve the Jack Pine mine expansion based on infringements of our treaty rights. Crystal will be talking next about the legal rights of the Beaver Lake Cree Nation and how our rights are actually being utilized. Other First Nations are utilizing these same powers. In BC, we have the Hold the Wall campaign and the First Nations that are standing up against the Northern Gateway Pipeline. We have right now currently happening an encampment in Burnaby Mountain with First Nations and non-First Nations allies standing up against the Kinder Morgan pipeline. In the United States and Canada, we have cross-boundary agreements to protect and hold the line, protect the sacred treaties and declarations, utilizing our treaty rights, not just here in Canada, but in the United States, to hold the line against these illegal developments on treaty and Aboriginal rights and Indigenous peoples' lands and territories. We have an imperative right now, a global imperative that is really being led by Indigenous peoples to hold the line, to stop the destruction and start that healing. You know, Canada is supposed to be in this place of reconciliation with its First Nations for the damages it's done through the residential schools, but at the same time they're talking about reconciliation, they're still destroying and subjugating and annihilating the lands of our people. It's absolutely imperative that we stand together to hold the line, to stop destruction and start the healing. And remembering that we're all in this together. Every major corporation in the world is here. We have a responsibility to send a message back out to the world that this is not acceptable and that another way is possible. And I do this for my children. I do this because I want them to know what the Athabasca Delta is. I want them to know what it means to be Kaital Dene Sutlene people. I want them to know what a moose tastes like. It's so funny when I talk to conservation people because I'm like, we want to save the caribou and the bison so we can eat them. But it's true. We do. We want to be able to eat them forever. And the only way to do that is to conserve them and to do it properly. And we want to live in harmony with them. And I want my children to know what that means. And so I find that a lot of this, I'm driven to do this stuff. And it's not just about protecting the Acfn's lands and territory. It's about protecting this planet. We have a global imperative, and we're all in this, and we all have an ability to do our part where we can. The IPCC has said that we have to leave 2/3 of the oil in the ground, and yet the Alberta government wants to dig it all up. We have to send a message, and we have to send it clear, and we have to do it now. And I do this because of my children. I do this because of my identity and my culture and who I am. And I want to end things off with this really great video. It's 2 minutes long because it's really inspiring. Yes, well, I think there is. No, it's not working. It's plugged in. Oh, crap. Sorry. How do I go? If it doesn't work, it's fine. If it doesn't work, it's fine, guys. I'll just tell you what it says.
Is it playing right now?
I think so. Yeah.
Sorry. Oh,
No.
nope.
Okay. Well, then we're not going to watch it.
Sorry.
It was just a.
Yeah, I suppose I could, actually. Yeah, that would work. Is it playing at all?
Yeah.
Sound?
Yeah, it is. Can't hear it.
But it's plugged in, right?
Yeah.
Every generation, at every point throughout
Is
history,
It's not very loud.
Yeah.
we are asked to do something great. We are asked to stand for justice, for peace, for the health and well-being and welfare of humanity.
It's not very loud.
What we've been doing this week represents the best of what
How many
America
people does it take to get the sound working?
represents the best of what tribal nations can be.
Yeah.
There was a time when the cowboys and Indians and ranchers fought.
Oh,
That time is behind us. Today we stand hand in hand, united,
Oh, that's kind of coming through.
and like our civil rights leaders before us,
It's all the way up.
we're standing up
Let's start
for what's
again.
right.
Let's start it again.
We've got it on this. On top of this.
I could put it on the internet.
Like,
Here. I have an idea, guys.
Let's try this.
No. What was it? Reject.
sorry. Should have asked before.
Yeah, I know. I should have done that, but I didn't. I can't find the link.
Okay,
Well,
we
but
might be
this
able
should
to play
display
through
it
the
anyway.
podium
Let's-
microphone that it's sitting on right now.
Let's try that.
Let's try this one.
It's coming through. It's sitting right now.
Every generation, at every point throughout history, we are asked to do something great. We are asked to stand for justice, for peace, for the health and well-being and welfare of humanity. What we've been doing this week represents the best of what America can be. It represents the best of what tribal nations can be. There was a time when the cowboys and Indians and ranchers fought. That time is behind us. Today we stand hand in hand, united. And like our civil rights leaders before us, we're standing up for what's right.
We are giving this all we've got because we have nothing to gain and everything to lose. TransCanada, I hope you're listening. We are not going away. This is a fight you brought to us 5.5 years ago, and every time you get delayed, it gives us an opportunity to speak out and tell the whole truth.
Farmers, ranchers, Native Americans of the United States have endured hard times. During the past couple years, we have been bullied by TransCanada, but we will prevail, passing our homesteads onto the next generation, the future generation, our children.
We're suffering from environmental genocide from this extractive industry, and we need your help to care for yourselves and your 7 generations to come.
And we can't have any more pollution. We need the CO2 to stop. Our grandchildren will be trying so hard to dig themselves out of the hole that we're digging right now just to make a few bucks over the last few years of the fossil fuel age. I say to President Obama, why not stand up and put America on the right side of history?
Now, the first drumbeat that you hear is the heartbeat of your mother. Mother Earth, her heartbeat is getting weak now. We must protect her. We must protect our future generations.
We are from the front lines of the oil that's coming through these pipelines. We are the ones that are bearing some of the worst impacts of these projects that are out of control, and they are destroying the land, the culture, and the people. And enough is enough. I'm so glad to see a gathering like this, the Cowboy Indian Alliance. It shows the strengths and the foundations of this country. We can no longer afford to be economic hostages in the race to industrialize Mother Earth.
If we stay complacent, if we do not raise our voice, we damn the next generation. You are hope. You are change. You are the future. And we are not going to stop until this is shut down.
And I just wanted to end on the reason I really wanted to show that is because just on Friday, the Senate voted down the approval of the Keystone XL pipeline. It shows what can happen when we put ourselves together and we align ourselves and we look out for the greater good. And Crystal has been a big part of a lot of the work down in the United States, and it's so great to have her come here today to talk about some of the work that's being done and how First Nations rights are being utilized and being put at the forefronts of these struggles to protect our lands, our cultures, and our identity, and the future of Mother Earth. Thank you, Masicho.
Thank you, Eriel, for a really motivating and passionate talk. I see we have a very powerful panel this morning. So next we have Pamela Lameman and Crystal, sorry. Crystal Lameman. So I'll just briefly introduce Crystal. She feels it's her obligation as a mother to protect her land, water, and culture for her children and future generations. Currently, she is working as a climate and energy campaigner for the Sierra Club Canada and is a fellow of Indigenous Environmental Network. She utilizes both her formal academia with 2 university degrees, but above all, her Indigenous ways of knowing and being to articulate the impacts of the direct exploitation of the tar sands while addressing environmental racism that the Government of Canada imposes on First Nations people in the name of resource extraction. So I will now have Crystal present for us.
I don't think your intention was to make anybody cry, but you know, the elderly lady that spoke there, Casey Camp, she's Ponca from Oklahoma. And you know, as young people, we don't claim to know anything. You know, I'm lucky I was raised by old people. I was raised by my grandmother. And it's with those kind of old people, you know, we're blessed to have those kind of elders in our lives to push us forward. You know, this work that we do is not easy. I'm a mom too. I have 2 small kids, and my second degree was a teaching degree, and I did that so that I could be home with my kids. And I went home in 2011, and I realized how bad things really were. So I had to give up my teaching career. And it's not easy being a single mom, you know, and having to run from one place of this country to another to protect our rights and our children's basic human rights to drink clean water and breathe clean air. I was just in Chicago yesterday. I keynoted a conference there for the University of Illinois Native American Students Association, and flew home to be here for this, because it makes me feel good, you know, when I'm able to be on our own traditional territory, and for our people here to be educated on these issues. So with that, I've chosen not to use any slides or anything, which is really good because I watched her slides and it was a lot of the same slides. So she did all the work for me. I just had to talk. So miasin kiksi payao would say squat the me beth the gwe ko squat the me we nia Crystal Lameman amiskage ka nia yao piagos kanos tisama oyo siwi and gutasik. What I said in my Cree language, the language of this territory that you're in, Treaty 6, I said, good morning from the doorway in to the doorway out. I'm Crystal Lameman, Beaver Lake Cree Nation, Treaty number 6. And for those of you that don't know, the Beaver Lake Cree Nation is located about 2.5 hours northeast of Edmonton, just near Lac La Biche. So I'm grateful to be here, you know, at the University of Alberta as an alumni of this institution, and grateful to be here on the traditional territory of my ancestors. So I'm going to start with a little tiny story. On and around May 20th of last year, 4 oil spills were reported on the Canadian Natural Resources Limited lease pads that are located on the Cold Lake Air Weapons Range. 3 of these spills were on land, and 1 was found under a lake that ultimately caused portions of that lake to be drained. Over 200 animals and amphibians lost their lives. Over 1.5 million liters of bitumen emulsion, which is basically water mixed with toxic chemicals and bitumen, spilled onto Treaty 6 lands, and spills that we have no way to stop, and yet that same company is submitting applications to the Alberta Energy Regulator to begin re-steaming and to expand existing projects, and the AER is approving them. We're experiencing a complete assault on our ways of knowing and being, our right to self-determination, and our right to free, prior, and informed consent. So here we are, with the AER shutting us out from providing input on oil sands projects that will affect our communities. And the AER's decision on this and other recently approved projects mean the public, that's you, and First Nations impacted by energy developments won't have a seat at the regulatory table to express their concerns, much less an opportunity to have their concerns addressed before a project is built. And the new regulator's approach to exclude First Nations and other rural Albertans from the approval process for energy projects has serious implications for our communities. Yet the AER, industry, and governments run around yelling that we are involved and that in cases like the CNRL Primrose, they're working on giving it back. And I question that. Giving what back? What was never yours in the first place to take? The over 300,000 kilograms of oily vegetation that was removed, which is ultimately medicines that are natural to us, medicines that our old people talk about, that in their purest form, combined, could cure cancer. That's the stories we hear from our old people. muskeg destroyed. And if anybody in this room knows anything about muskeg and that ecosystem, once it's destroyed, there is no way to reclaim it. Reclamation. That fancy word that slips from the mouths of people who have given First Nations people every reason not to trust. The current models of reclamation are not adequate, and they're not proven to put the land back to the way that it was. So how do we mitigate the impacts of tar sands to the land I call home? When we have federal and provincial governments collaboratively dismantling meaningful review and regulation of tar sands operations, which contribute to the cumulative impacts of this industry as a whole, and with tar sands as an extreme energy being the largest emitter of greenhouse gas emissions in Canada, they set the timer on this ticking climate bomb. And as the human race being backed into a corner, the citizens of this country helpless under the brass hands making willfully ignorant decisions that have real life consequence. We are left raising up the platform on the rights of the original peoples of this land that we call Canada. And the Beaver Lake Cree Nation is currently engaged in 2 lawsuits against these governments. And the first one is the one that's most familiar. And it's the landmark Constitutional Treaty Rights Challenge, a challenge that has named tens of thousands of treaty rights violations of Treaty 6 by the province of Alberta, the government of Canada, and every major oil company in the world operating in the controversial Canadian tar sands. And the Beaver Lake Cree Nation case represents a growing understanding that through Aboriginal title and inherent treaty rights, the Native rights-based strategic framework is the strongest legally binding strategy to stop the expansion of the tar sands at the source, including all of the associated pipeline infrastructure coming out of Alberta to bring this landlocked resource to international markets. And what sets the Beaver Lake Cree apart from other First Nations tar sands cases is that we're not going after one single project, but rather all of them. We have set historical precedents in our treaty rights cumulative impacts case because even with the governments pulling every piece of red tape that they could, they fought from the day that we filed this lawsuit in 2008, tooth and nail every single thing you could think of. When we initially filed this lawsuit, we cited over 17,000 treaty rights violations and infringements. And what the Canadian government came back and said was that we had to file each and every one of those separately in the Canadian court system. So in essence, we would have to go to court 17,000 times. The judge wasn't too impressed with that. We had a lawyer from Tuxton Chambers in London, England, come forward and offer his services pro bono to the Beaver Lake Cree. And Alberta pulled out every piece of red tape to ensure that he could not practice law in Alberta. On December 10th of 2012, the very first National Day of Action for Idle No More happened to be the very first day, happened to be the day, rather, that Beaver Lake Cree was in court. And, I still remember very clearly that time, we were planning this rally for the Beaver Lake Cree outside the courthouse downtown. And, we were hearing this buzz of Idle No More and this National Day of Action, but nothing was being organized in Edmonton. And one of our campaigners that used to be here in Alberta, I was working with her and we were planning this rally for the Beaver Lake Cree. And I said, and we were expecting about 200-300 people. And I said, hey, well, there's no Idle No More Day of Action. Let's just throw it in there with Beaver Lake Cree. So we did. And we went from a couple hundred people to 1,500 people that day. And the sheriffs actually told us, you will not stop in front of the courthouse. So they said it would be it was an arrestable action if we stopped in front of the courthouse. And I don't know why I'm telling this story. I've never ever told it, but I must be meant to tell it. But so they started marching, and my uncle Al, who is the former chief of the Beaver Lake Cree Nation, he was chief in our community for 35 years, one of the longest standing chiefs in all of Alberta, and the one who filed this lawsuit back in 2008. And he's retired now, but he still goes to court when they're in court, and he's in his 70s now. But anyways, long story short, I had to walk him into the courthouse while these guys started marching. And Eriel was there in the front with Gitz, and Gitz was one of the guys that was speaking there in that short video. And so they started marching, and we took them inside the courthouse, and we come running out, and they were already gone around the corner, because what they were going to do was from Churchill Square loop around the courthouse and then go to the Department of Indian Affairs in Canada Place, Main Street of Jasper. So I run out. Oh, they're gone. What are we going to do? Well, let's run this way, and we'll cut them off, and we'll join in the front. So we were running, and I could hear the drums. I could hear them. And I said, they're coming, hurry up. And we were running. And I get to the street, and I stop dead in my tracks, because here these guys were in front of the courthouse. They stopped. And at that time, that song that they were singing was the treaty song. They were singing that honor song, our treaty song. And I just started crying. But at the same time, as I'm running towards them, I'm thinking, oh, shit, what if they, they start arresting people? My uncle's going to be mad at me. And, later on, my uncle, he called me, and he said, I want you to come over. So I went over, and he said, I want to tell you something. He said, you all were outside of the courthouse, he said, and the judge was going on, they were talking, Canada was putting forward their 10 reasons why they needed to throw out the case, because by this time, the Beaver Lake Cree had set precedents, and we had been granted a trial. Canada came back, and Alberta came back and gave 10 reasons why we should not be able to go to trial. So they were hearing that at that moment, and he said, all of a sudden, he said, we heard a drum. He said, and it was like that drum was right outside that door of that courthouse. He said, and the courtroom went quiet, the judge stopped talking. He said, and she listened to that song. He said, and when it finished, we could hear you all yelling. One of the quotes that was put in media was the quote from the judge. And so what she said in that moment was, she looked towards Canada and Alberta, and she said, you are wasting the time and the resources of the Beaver Lake Cree, and you are wasting the time of this court, and you would be best served to go back and prepare for trial, because this court will not hear you until that moment. So I just wanted to share that with you when I talk about how they have tried their best to pull out every piece of red tape that they could. And like I said, we're the first community to ever be granted a trial in relation to the cumulative impacts in the over-industrialization on the 38,972 square kilometers we call our traditional hunting territory, and our inherent rights to hunt, trap, and fish for as long as the sun shines, the grass grows, and the rivers flow. Because when 34,773 square kilometers of that has become oil and gas well sites, and that is infringing on our right to practice our ways of knowing and being, there is grounds to challenge, and that's what we did. And the second case is a recent case, and I don't think anybody in here has heard about it, so I'm going to give like a quick little blurb. The Beaver Lake Cree Nation, along with another First Nation, the Whitefish Lake First Nation, which is also called Goodfish Lake, have filed an appeal with the Alberta courts and the Alberta Energy Regulator after the AER shut us out from providing input on an oil sands project that will affect our community. The AER recently approved an oil sands project by Canadian Natural Resources, CNRL, yet again, for a significant expansion of their Kirby in situ SAGD oil sands extraction project. The AER refused to hold a hearing before approving the project, and despite objections from several Aboriginal communities. The location of this one is up near Conklin. Most of you know where Conklin is, yeah. The expansion project will cover about 480 square kilometers of land. It's located in an area where the caribou herd is already extremely fragile and is predicted to be wiped out soon. As of 2011, we have between 175 and 275 woodland caribou within that 38,972 square kilometers. The population is as such largely because of the large number of in situ oil sands developments like this one in the region. The expansion project overlaps a caribou calving area as well, and it overlaps several important traditional use sites for our communities, and it overlaps a trap line that's held by one of the members of the Beaver Lake Cree. It borders a lake that is important for the exercise of our treaty rights. The project will use significant amounts of water, about 18,000 barrels of fresh water per day. The expansion will result in an additional production of 85,000 barrels per day of bitumen. And both the AER and Alberta Environment have actively prevented First Nations from being involved in decisions that affect our way of life. Several objections were filed with the AER by First Nations who use the lands in and around the project, yet the AER refused to hold a hearing before rubber stamping its approval for the project. Our experience with the AER has been less than positive. They seem to use every opportunity and rely on technical wrangling to put roadblocks in front of Aboriginal communities wishing to have input on oil sands projects. And this is not how a neutral public tribunal is supposed to behave. And the Beaver Lake Cree tried to file its concerns with Alberta Environment, but Alberta Environment refused to even accept our statement of concern. And our major concern is that some of our members hunt, fish, trap, and gather traditional medicine and berries in the area around Conklin and in the project area. But we're seeing projects forge ahead at breakneck speeds without the First Nations' rights being recognized and taken into serious consideration. And the government has provided no clear process or venue for First Nations input into oil sands development. And we feel like the province is playing a shell game and using technical maneuvers to thwart meaningful input from First Nations and other rural Albertans who are affected by these developments. The federal government's recent changes mean they have removed themselves from involvement in oil sands projects like this one, and that's left us no choice but to go to court to protect our treaty rights. And the Canadian government has not followed. You know, when it comes down to it, the movement that Eriel talks about with ACFN, the movement I talk about with BLCN, Mikisew, I can name the nations that are involved in forging ahead in asserting our inherent rights. It's because the Canadian government has not followed Canadian and international legal requirements to consult our nations, and moreover has not achieved the minimum international standard of free, prior, and informed consent. Free, prior, and informed consent, consultation, and consent must be defined by us, not through these systems that have been created outside of our communities. Article 32 of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples states that Indigenous peoples have the right to determine and develop priorities and strategies for the development or use of their lands or territories and other resources. Consent in relation to First Nations rights are arguably some of the most important emerging rights on the Canadian legal landscape, and certainly the most powerful environmental rights in this country, thanks to Bill C-38. And when those standards are not met, there's legal grounds to challenge these mega projects that are destroying our rights to hunt, trap, and fish. These governments made their law. Thus, they have to abide by it. They don't get to pick the pieces of their law they like and which ones they don't. They made it, they have to abide by it. As Indigenous people, we abide not by a written law, but by the law of our Creator, natural law. A law that puts the collective rights of all living beings above all. And through our legal orders, we are exercising our inherent rights, and through that we are fighting for not only ourselves, but for the basic human right to drink clean water and breathe clean air for all living beings, and for the health and longevity of our generations to come. So we must commit to consolidating our efforts and stand strong in the opposition of the agreements forged without our knowledge, participation, and consent. And I'm going to leave you with this, and it comes from the Lakota people. Honor those who came before us, meeting the needs of the present generations, not compromising the future, so that the coming generations are able to meet their own needs and guide our vision and renew each cycle of life. So wherever you are, demand systems that are founded on the rights of nature, the rights of human beings, and the rights of those beings that cannot speak for themselves, and the ability to sustain ourselves. Examaga, Aihai, all my relations. That's it, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Is the mic still on?
Yeah. I think it's working.
Yeah. Just real fast. If you want more information on the Beaver Lake Cree's case, you can go to raventrust.com, click on the Beaver Lake Cree tab. There was a lady that came forward. I'm just like not going to be humble here for like 2 seconds. If you have like $5 you want to donate to our case, you can go to the Raven Trust site, and if you do, ensure that you earmark it for Beaver Lake Cree.
Thank you, Crystal, and thank you, Eriel, for a very, very, very powerful presentation. So we do have a little bit of time for questions. So I know I did see one hand over here on my left. I see one at the back. Did I see another hand over
And this
here?
kind of stuff too. So we're going to aim to hear from people we haven't
and
heard
one
from
at the
yet.
front. So there's two.
Sorry. Hi, my name is Mina. I'm a social worker here at the University of Alberta Hospital, and I think I saw Crystal speak at Naomi Klein's talk, and it was amazing. It was very inspirational for me, and I didn't know about these landmark cases against the provincial and federal governments and against these oil companies, and I think that the work that you ladies do is amazing, and I'm thankful for the sacrifices you make and the sacrifices that your families make for you to be able to contribute. I wanted to say that it was really easy to donate Aeroplan miles on the raventrust.org, or was it org or com? website because it was really simple. So like that was something, you know, maybe you don't have even the $5, but you know, I have airplane miles that often they expire every year. I just thought that would be a really great way because it allows for the people who are working on this case to be able to travel across the country. And you need our resources. And I think the one thing that I really took away from having you speak that day at Naomi Klein's talk and today is that your rights are my rights. They are inextricably linked. And there's no other way to think about it and no other way that, and that was the most powerful message that I received that day and that I will, I've continued to receive today. So thank you so much for that.
I'm concerned that you didn't actually name the person and his government that are responsible for a lot of these things because they do not represent most Canadians' values. It is the Harper government that has done these things. It is the Alberta government. And I'm ashamed for the Canadian government to be represented as acting this way towards Aboriginal people. A second comment is I just finished the Naomi Klein book, and it's in all our self-interest to support this movement because the rights of the Indigenous are going to save us all from the climate going over the edge of the cliff. It's in our self-interest because our governments aren't looking out for our interest or for the interests of future generations. So thank you for your work.
And I think we'll take it back. And
Hi, my name is Meenal Srivastava. I'm a political economist at Athabasca University. Thank you so much for your amazing talk. And I think it's there are those two trends are strands that have already been captured by the earlier two commentators. That it involves everyone. It's a fight that should involve everyone. But also, there is another aspect to it, which I find that hasn't been brought out as much as it should, because potentially it can create more alliances, and that is the shale oil boom. I know it's sort of underplayed, but the non-conventional oil sector has changed quite a bit in the past few years. And in that sector, the tar sands remain the most expensive to produce oil anywhere in the world. So with the shale oil bonanza that some people think is short-lived, I don't think it's short-lived because it's not just in the United States that they have huge reserves of shale oil, but also in Australia and other parts of the world. In fact, the leading exporters of shale oil happen to be China and Brazil. So in that scenario where the global oil markets is shifting so fundamentally with more fracking, with shale oil and all sorts of other kinds of potential unconventional oil discoveries in other parts of the world, tar sands is an economically unviable venture. So it's not only environmentally wrong, ethically wrong, and in every way it's just not the right thing in which to invest, but it's also economically totally unviable. So I think this is another aspect that needs to be probably talked about a little bit more. Thank you.
Hello. I think we didn't touch on it in our presentations, but we have been, both Crystal and I have been heavily involved in lots of discussions around the economics and the economic platform, or the imbalanced economic platform that the tar sands and other extreme energy projects are running on. We're talking about market manipulations by corporations and by governments to create economies that make these extreme energy markets viable. And this isn't some sort of conspiracy theorist type stuff. This is actually real. And Naomi Klein talks about it a lot in her books. And I think it is very, very important that we understand that we are being manipulated. Just recently, the price of oil has dropped significantly, and it's so funny because 3 years ago, or not even 3, maybe about 5 years ago, they were talking about tar sands, and they were saying that tar sands were economically viable because of demand, and that demand was increasing, and therefore they had to keep the supplies up, and therefore we create a market that makes it more economically viable, so on and so forth. I watched CBC News just after the market started declining about a month ago, and they had an economist on there, and he said, demand has dropped. And I'm like, okay, so the economists have no idea what they're talking about, because 5 years ago they were saying we don't have enough supply to meet the demand. Demand has dropped so significantly that the price of oil is dropping because places like China and India, where we like to point our fingers at and say they're the reason we need so much oil, they're actually coming out as being the forefront leaders in looking at alternatives. Canada is failing on an economic platform, on a climate platform, on a human rights platform, on an environment. Like, we are so behind the rest of the world, and it's time to start telling these corporations and these companies that our country and our lands and our treaty rights are no longer going to be an economic playground for greedy corporations to dig up dirty energy and push us over the edge.
I just want to add to that too, because you brought up the fracking. I mean, we're facing environmental degradation and destruction every single day, not just in tar sands, but some of the examples are the Northern Gateway and the Kinder Morgan pipelines in BC. I'm now gonna work my way across Canada, because you just kind of like prompted that. And we have the tar sands and natural gas and coal extraction in Alberta. The uranium and potash developments and crude oil extraction in Saskatchewan, the destruction of treaty lands in Manitoba for hydraulic power generation, Energy East, like Eriel mentioned, the mining of diamonds in Athabasca, the Enbridge's Line 9, fracking in El Sipuktuk, again, mining of diamonds in Northwest Territories. Those are a few examples of the ongoing exploitation. And we talk about tar sands because that's where we are. Members of all of these communities across Canada are making every possible attempt at curbing the environmental racism that we're enduring. And we're collectively standing together and demanding environmental justice, which aims at the understanding that there is a need to address and reduce the disproportionate harm from environmental degradation that affects Indigenous, low-income, and minority communities. The people of color in frontline communities face environmental burdens from the extreme resource extraction and exploitation, the farmers and the ranchers. I don't think we say it just in the sense of tar sands. There's all of these things that are interconnected. It's all interconnected, and it's not about the environment versus the economy.
Is this on? I just want to say thank you. Thank you so much for being on the front lines of this battle. And I don't know, I definitely speak for myself, but probably a number of people in the room, that I feel so ashamed at not having been there, like right beside you, holding like the placard to stop this crazy expansion. When, Crystal, when you say like that the story like that happened at City Hall and the courts like right down the street, and I don't know, or when I was reading this book, the book that I gave you, The Inconvenient Indian, and it talks about the Alberta Tar Sands as like the most destructive project, and the most destructive project against First Nations. And I was reading it and I couldn't even continue because I felt so ashamed. I'm like, this is Alberta. This is like up the street. This is my land. Like, this is like, I live here. And I don't participate, like I know of it. But my question is, can you name 3 things that I can do? And for everybody, like what are practical things that I can do to participate in this battle? This war is more than a battle.
Well, one, Crystal talked about donating. The legal costs are huge, and ACFN's also on Raven Trust as well, so you can donate to ACFN or Beaver Lake. And so that's one. And I think the second one, and that I think is really important, is enacting your democratic right and your right as a public citizen of this province to stand up and write to the government, write to SIA. When applications come forward, say, we don't want this, we don't need this. You have, every application that goes through has a public commenting period, and any one of you can write in. So the Canadian Environmental Assessment Agency has public commenting periods where you can send your comments. It can just be like, I support Beaver Lake, or I support ACFN, or I think this project is a piece of crap. And guess what? Every single public comment has to be put in a public, accessible, on the website, and everyone gets to read your comment.
And how do you find out when applications are?
So SIA does announcements. So if you find out about, there's a couple new projects coming up. So there's the CNRL project, which just applied. There's right now ACFN is challenging the Tech Resources, Tech Frontier project. So you can just Google any of these. And the public commenting periods happen sporadically, but you can sign up on the SIA website to be notified. So you can just say, I'm an interested party, and then they'll send you notifications of when there's a public commenting period. So there's a CNRL application, there's a tech application, there's a Shell Pierre River Mine application, there's Synovus there's literally, I mean, just become familiar with the different projects. There's so many of them, to be honest. It's a bit daunting to try and determine which ones you want to intervene on, but if you're interested in a particular area, you can call the Alberta Environmental Resources Office or the AER, and they have to tell you which projects are there, and then you can sign up as an interested party, and then you could give your public comments. So that's a really, really easy way for people to get involved. And then the donating, I don't know, can you think of something else?
Some people say, well, I don't have any money. You can have a fundraiser. Have a fundraiser and donate the money. Show up. Show up to our rallies and our marches. Show up. So you can go to, what is the Alberta Tar Sands Network. I should know that by now. The Alberta Tar Sands Network. There's a Facebook page, and there's a web page. I don't remember what it is. Google Alberta Tar Sands Network. Google that. And there's, so Keepers of the Athabasca's on there, Beaver Lake Cree, Sierra Club, ACFN, Greenpeace, we're all on there. So anything that any of us are doing, we post it there. So share that. Share it, share it, share it. Tell everybody to go there, because then that's going to motivate us to use that website more. Fundraise, and talk about it. Talk about this. People are not comfortable talking about this in Alberta. Talk about it. If it's uncomfortable to talk about, that means there's something wrong. That's it.
Okay. So thank you, Crystal and Eriel, for an amazing session this morning. Just a reminder that all of the sessions, or not all, but most of the sessions have been live streamed. And so there will be video archives of all the sessions. So go check out the website. Also like Parkland Institute on Facebook and Twitter if that's your thing. And at 12, the next session will be in the large theater. So thank you all and enjoy the rest of your day.